Welcome back, Renegade. I am super excited that you are back again with us today. We have a really good episode today that I am super excited about. So, I got to start off with a couple of questions like, why are you here with me today? Why are you spending your most valuable resource, your time, with me today? Well, I'm venturing a guess it's because you're a renegade. You want to make big things happen. You want to change the world for the better because you have plans, you have dreams, you have ambitions and goals, and you're coming here to learn the tools to make those dreams a reality. And you're going to change the world for the better. Only sometimes, just about all the time, we can see that life is actually really, really hard. Like, really hard. See, if building empires and changing the world were easy, everyone would do it. But then we see examples all the time of where people fall short, right? See, 7 out of 10 small businesses fail and go bankrupt within the first 5 years. The US government, despite having 3 times the budget for a military, has not definitively won a war since 1945. And 8 out of 10 every new diet or workout routine is ultimately abandoned within the first 30 days. Okay, I made that last statistic up, but it seems reasonable and it's probably still true. But like, you get the point, right? Like, winning, succeeding, knowing that our efforts are contributing towards our desired end states and turning our dreams into a reality can be a really daunting and really, really difficult task. So, how do we as renegades, how do we set ourselves apart from these statistics? How do we set the conditions to place ourselves amongst the select few who actually make things happen, who actually bring their dreams into reality? We're going to be digging into it today on our episode. See, the problem is most people don't apply a specific strategy or framework into achieving their goals. The idea is to use a process or a formula, some sort of strategy that maximizes our results. And in order to do this, we're going to employ a 3-step proven strategy to making sure that we can achieve our goals. Welcome to the Renegade Institute. All right. So, let's say we have a goal in mind. We have a thing that we're going to do. We're going to change the world. We're going to build something from scratch. How do we prove to ourselves that what we're doing is actually working? How do we know that we're on the right track towards moving from where we are to our desired end state, our desired goals? And how can we prove to our bosses or our hiring managers definitively that our contributions are having a measurable impact on the projects that we're working on? See, this skill set, it is considered invaluable in the professional workforce. In the State Department and USAID, back before Doge gutted it, I'm not even sure if it's a thing anymore, they called it monitoring and evaluation. In the Department of Defense with the Army, they use terms like measures of performance and measures of effectiveness to try and grapple with this topic, to try and measure is what they're doing actually translating over into the desired end state. And in marketing and finance, this term is generally called return on investment, or ROI. See, the idea is to use a process or a formula, some sort of strategy that maximizes our results. And it structures our approach in a way where there's a causal relationship between what we're doing and what we're hoping to achieve. And so, how do we do this? How do we employ this as renegades within our own lives when so many other people seem to get it wrong? So, to start off with, we're going to use kind of a little example to highlight these concepts. Like, let's say that you've got a friend who has decided they're going to step up their physical fitness. They're going to take their personal health seriously. And they announce to themselves in the world that it is time to get into shape. But what comes next once you've made that decision, once you've highlighted that end goal? See, the problem is most people don't apply a specific strategy or framework into achieving their goals. They don't use a proven, proactive plan for how they're going to document and improve upon their successes. And so the process generally ends up looking like this, where somewhere around January 1st, people make a decision, I'm going to get into shape. They end up joining a gym, they buy a Fitbit, they join a running club, and they start enacting their strategy. But then as motivation kind of wanes and the weeks start to go off and results are difficult to quantify and see, most eventually start to give up. And after 2 months later, they're kind of right back where they started. But this is not how renegades operate, right? See, renegades, you as a renegade, you're intentional in everything that you do. You're judicious in your application of resources, the use of your time, and you're going to proactively set the conditions for your success. And in order to do this, we're going to employ a 3-step proven strategy to making sure that we can achieve our goals. And that is going to be 1, we clearly define our end state. 2, we establish measurable indicators of success. And 3, we conduct pre and post testing of our efforts. So let's jump into the practical application, all right? So how are we going to do this? See, the first step that we're going to do is something called operationalizing our end state. Now, what does that mean? So looking at like getting into shape. What does getting into shape mean? What does it look like? How do we know when we've achieved it? As of right now, we don't really have a good answer to that because getting into shape is not operationalized for us. It's mushy, it's ambiguous, it's too subjective. See, is getting into shape, is it raw strength? Is it I want to get faster? Is it I want more flexibility and balance? Or is it just I want to look better naked? As of right now, we don't know because it's too subjective. So if we're going to operationalize our end state, we need to take an ambiguous getting into shape and transform it into something definitive. And this new definition that we're going to use, it must be specific, observable, and measurable. I'm going to say this again because it's so important. And it's going to be kind of a reoccurring theme throughout the episode. But our definitions need to be specific in that they are clearly defined. They are precise. They are unambiguous. They are detailed and exact, leaving little room for interpretation or confusion. They also need to be observable. Like, what does it look like? Can it be seen? And it has to be measurable. Can it be counted? Can it be quantified with some sort of metric or unit? So our first example, getting into shape. Is this specific? Not really, because getting into shape can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Is it observable? Kind of. Like we all generally know what someone who's in shape looks like, but like someone who's in shape for a strongman competition might look totally different than someone that's preparing for a marathon. And is it measurable? As of right now, no, because we don't know what we're measuring for. We don't know units. Like there's no like unit of in shapeness right now that we can use. So we need to operationalize this definition. We need to turn getting into shape into something tangible that we can use. See, instead of saying, I'm going to get into shape, we translate it into smaller goals of, I'm going to increase my 1 rep max by 15% on my bench press, or I'm going to decrease my 400 meter sprint time by 10 seconds, or I'm going to decrease my belly fat by 3 inches. See, all of these above definitions, these are operationalized versions of getting into shape. They're specific to you and your goals. They're clearly defined and unambiguous. They're observable. I can watch someone run a 400 meter sprint and I know what it is. And they're measurable. With all of these above statements, I can measure progress with units such as pounds, such as seconds, such as inches. See, the first step in operationalizing our desired end state is where most people first go wrong. And the results when we do this can be absolutely disastrous. Now, what do I mean by that? So, for example, the war in Afghanistan. See, when the war in Afghanistan happened, we never started with like a clearly defined end state. We never really knew what our ultimate goal was there. We just knew that we had gotten hit by someone and we were going to hit someone back. And then everything got really fuzzy from that point on. Like, was it to win hearts and minds? Was it to build a thriving democracy that was aligned with Western values? Was it being the partner of choice to the people of Afghanistan? And what do those end states even mean? Are they specific? Are they observable? Do I know what a thriving democracy looks like? Are they measurable? How do I measure a one heart and mind? We just don't have the answers to these questions. And because this definition, this end state that we were looking for, wasn't operationalized, it was mushy, it was subjective, and it kind of doomed all of our efforts from the start. And what was the result of this? It resulted in the longest war in U.S. history, spanning over 20 years. The United States spent $2.31 trillion. We had 2,459 service members killed, and it led to a generation of service members with PTSD, amputations, long-term service-related injuries, and we saw a huge uptick in suicide rates and veterans harming themselves. And what was all this for? At the end of the day, did we meet our goals? Did we win the hearts and minds? See, because we did not have a clearly defined end state using objective measures, we ended up losing the war in Afghanistan. The country is now completely controlled by the Taliban. We wasted trillions of dollars and we destroyed hundreds of thousands of lives in the process. So hopefully by now, I didn't want to be too dramatic, but I wanted to really hit the point that it is so important that the first thing we have to do is we have to operationalize our end state. We have to take it from something mushy, something subjective, and turn it into something more tangible. This then brings us to our second point of performance that we want to do, which is establishing measurable indicators of success. So again, much like our desired end state, our indicators of success must be specific, observable, and measurable. And hopefully there's some sort of causal relationship between what we're doing and our desired end state. For simple goals, often our indicators of success might actually just be the desired end state. Like if my end state is, I want to increase my 1 rep max on bench press, well, then my indicator of success is just my 1 rep max on bench press. However, we see in life, generally our goals are more complicated than that. They're not unidimensional, right? Like there's a ton of different aspects that makes up that. If I want to make a thriving business, there's not just one unit that I'm going to measure that by. And so these goals, they're generally composed of multiple sub goals. And so we're going to need to break down our desired end state into its simplest parts, kind of like figuring out the lowest common denominators for a large number. So we're going to break down the mushy end state of getting into shape into its subordinate parts. And so for me, I would generally break down getting into shape into 6 subcategories. I would break it down into pushing movements, pulling movements, legs, back, cardio, and endurance. I feel like that's a pretty holistic view at getting into shape. But as you can see, these are more objective than just getting into shape, but they're still pretty subjective. We don't I think we need to break those down even further into something more concrete. And so I then broke these down into 10 distinct, specific, observable, and measurable exercises that I'm going to perform to achieve all of those desired end states. And so that's going to look like my bench press, my overhead press, pull-ups, rows, squats, lunges, deadlift, bent over rows, 2-mile run, and 12-mile ruck. See, now we just did it. Like, hell yeah. We just identified all of our indicators of success for getting into shape. We took getting into shape, that mushy, nebulous concept, and we now have 10 metrics that we can view. They're specific. We can see them, we can observe them, and we can measure them to know that we are making progress towards our desired end state, and we know where to be focusing our efforts. But what happens when our goals, our desired end states, are not directly under our control? And see, this is where we need to understand direct goals versus indirect goals. So if my goal is to get into shape, it only depends upon me. I am the person that needs to do the thing. I am the one of which the desired end state will happen. And so I can solve the problems unilaterally by myself. This is a direct goal. I have direct control over the outcome. But if my goal is to increase company profits by convincing a customer to buy my product, then the situation is a little bit different, right? See, this is an indirect goal. I need someone else to do something. I need someone else to act aligned with my goals in order to achieve my desired end state. I do not have any direct control over the outcome. I can inform people, I can influence people, but I myself cannot make it happen. And so, examples of indirect goals are a customer makes a decision to buy my product, a person participates in a democratic election, or the citizens of Afghanistan adopt Western values and reject terrorist organizations. So, with our indirect goals, our job of identifying indicators of success gets a little bit more complicated. See, from here, we need to understand measures of performance and measures of effectiveness. These are the terms that the Army uses. See, a measure of performance is a specific, observable, and measurable action that I can take under my direct control that should, in theory, contribute to my desired end state. Examples of that for getting into shape are going to be like the number of reps and the number of sets I do in a workout, the number of miles I ran, the amount of weight that I pushed. In selling a product, those measures of performance might look like the number of ads we ran on TV, the number of free samples we distributed in a local community, or the number of social media posts that we made on a given platform. Or with liberating Afghanistan, measures of performance often looked like the number of terrorists killed, the number of bombs and bullets fired, and troops deployed. See, these are all direct actions that we can perform on our own with hopes of going from our actions to our desired end state. These are all measures of performance. There's something that we did to try and get towards our desired end state. However, this is a little different than our measures of effectiveness. See, measures of effectiveness, they are specific, observable, and measurable indicators of a specific outcome aligned to our desired end state. So examples on that could be an increase in my 1 rep max on bench press, customers ordering 17 units of my product, or 1,500 citizens of Afghanistan participating in a democratic election. See, unlike measures of performance, measures of effectiveness can either be direct, I'm doing it, or indirect, someone else is doing it on my behalf. This is where it gets tricky and people tend to mess up, right? Measures of performance, the things that I'm doing, do not always directly contribute to or equal measures of effectiveness, right? Like there might not be any causal relationship between the two at all, and we might just not know. And that's what we saw in the case of Afghanistan, right? Like our measures of performance were number of terrorists killed, but this did not equal our desired end state of a liberated democratic Afghanistan. There was no effective relationship between our actions, the things we were doing, and our desired end state. And so this is where we need to understand a thing called theory of change. So what is theory of change? Theory of change is a hypothesis or theory about how our direct actions will positively contribute to our desired end state. It needs to be based on supporting data and research and should be some sort of causal relationship. If I do A, then B will logically be the result. With weightlifting, if I gradually increase the amount of weight that I push every single week, it should translate into a stronger, healthier physique. But sometimes our theory of change, it can be wrong, or we just simply don't know enough about the problem, or the problem is too complex for us to really understand what actions are necessary in order to achieve our desired end state. And so an example of this could be like, let's say I knew nothing about working out whatsoever. I knew nothing about exercise. And I just saw all the people that I knew that were really strong and in shape. They ate a lot of protein and they drank a bunch of pre-workout. And then so my efforts, my actions, my measures of performance are I'm going to drink 8 protein shakes a day and 3 scoops of pre-workout a day. And I'm not going to do any exercise, right? that our measures of performance, the drinking of pre-workout and protein shakes, does not directly equal to getting strong, because there's no aspect of me lifting anything heavy. I'm not doing any exercise. Now, we can all see that and we can know that because it's general knowledge. You have to exercise to get strong. But when it comes to really complicated topics like nation building, making a democratic country, suddenly our actions, we're not really sure what things we need to do in order to hit our desired end state. And so, like, we're just like, if we kill all the baddies with bombs and bullets, then the country's going to become a stable democracy, right? Well, history will show that that was not necessarily the case. So sometimes our desired end states, they're really difficult to achieve. And we might not actually know what measures of performance we need to take in order to bring about our desired end state. So what tool can we use when we're tackling these more complicated problems to help us refine our efforts and know that the actions we're taking is translating over into our desired end state? And this comes to what is arguably the most important step. Importantist isn't a word. That's silly. The most important step is conducting pre and post effort testing. See, sometimes getting stronger is complicated. We don't know, should we do high volume workouts where it's like a lot of reps at a low weight? Do I push 20 pounds 20 times and just do a lot of volume? Or do I do a low volume workout where I push as much weight as I possibly can, but I only do it 3 times? Or is it some sort of combination in the two? Which strategy works better? We just don't know what we don't know, right? So we need to check ourselves as we progress, as we're moving along in our mission, to ensure that our actions, our measures of performance, are actually having a positive impact on our desired end state. So this brings us to the most important thing we can do outside of having a clearly defined end state, and that is we must conduct a pre-test. See, before you do anything, before you lift that first weight, before you deploy that first troop, before you run that first ad, you absolutely must know what the state of the situation is before you do anything. You need to get an understanding of the conditions, the lay of the land, whatever's happening before your intervention. You need to get a baseline. You cannot determine measures of effectiveness if you do not have a pretest. And this is because without a pretest, there's no way of establishing a causal relationship between what you're doing and what you're seeing on the ground. Any data that you collect, any progress measured without a baseline is just, there's nothing to compare it to. It's like, I have 7 units of what? Compared to what? You're 7 units taller, you're 7 units heavier, you're 7 units wealthier. You need to have a baseline, and you need to have that supporting evidence. So this is where you can kind of tell when organizations, individuals, or countries don't know what they're doing, right? And so when people are using measures of performance, the things that they are doing as an indicator of success or as a measure of effectiveness, that means they probably haven't done a baseline, and they probably don't know how to determine their effectiveness. And the example that we saw was like in Afghanistan, where we're like, I don't understand. The country's not liberated. We've killed all these terrorists, but yet the Taliban is still winning. We don't know why. We've dropped this many bombs. We've taken this much territory. We've spent this much money. They are using measures of performance as placeholders for measures of effectiveness because they didn't do a pretest and they didn't know what to measure for because they didn't have any indicators of success. So what is our baseline pretest? What does that look like? A baseline pretest is basically where you take measurements for all the specific, observable, and measurable indicators of success that you have previously identified before you do any work or make any progress. In terms of working out, these are going to look like your baseline weight, your baseline 1 rep max on all the workouts you want to do, your baseline time for your 2-mile ruck or your 2-mile run and your 12-mile ruck.
I gotta pump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers in this racket.
In Afghanistan, now again, Afghanistan is a massive problem, so it's going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of indicators of success. But that might look like What percentage of the country is currently controlled by the Taliban? How many people make monetary contributions to the Taliban? How many leaders have an open affiliation with the Taliban? Or how many towns is the Taliban openly recruiting in? So obviously, the more complex the problem is, the more indicators you need to be measuring for. Once you've conducted a pretest and you know where you're starting from, any changes in those figures in the post-test can generally be attributed to your efforts, right? So if I know currently I'm able to lift 245 on my bench press, but I knew before I started I was only able to lift 200, I now know that my measure of effectiveness over a given amount of time is 45 pounds. Whereas if I didn't have the post or the pretest, if I lift 245 pounds today, well, compared to what? I don't know where I started. You can't prove measures of effectiveness. So you have to have that pretest. This is why it is so important, because it gives us the benchmark for the feedback and that feedback loop to know if the actions we're taking are contributing towards that desired end state. And so we're going to kind of break this down into two examples, right? So we got John. John doesn't watch the channel. John's not a renegade, but one day he wakes up and he's like, I'm going to get in shape. And so he joins the gym. He does a fairly good job and he manages to hit the gym 3 to 4 times a week, but he doesn't record his workouts or any of his individual exercises. He just picks a machine, picks an exercise, he pushes a decently heavy weight, and he just does it until he can't really do it anymore, and then he moves on to the next machine. And after a month, he feels like he's getting stronger, but he's not really sure. And he thinks his weight is going up as well, which is kind of discouraging to him because he thinks he might be getting fatter. But he doesn't look that much different in the mirror despite hitting the gym regularly and putting forth all this effort. And so his hope kind of starts to dwindle. And 3 months later, he's becoming discouraged because he's not really sure if he's getting better at all. And worse yet, he can't attribute any of the efforts, any of the measures of performance that he's doing to his success towards his desired end state. And he has no way of knowing if he tweaks his workout here, if he does this exercise instead of this one, if he's going to get better results. And so without clearly defined wins every step of the process, he starts to lose hope and motivation, and he just eventually gives up. Now, example 2, we got Sarah. Now, Sarah is a renegade, so she's going to be smart about this, right? She's going to use modern solutions for modern problems. And she decides she's going to get in shape and joins a gym. But she knows she needs to conduct a pretest before doing anything. And so she does a dedicated notes section in her phone where she writes down all of her baseline measurements, her height, her weight, her 1 rep max on 4 key exercises that she's identified as being important to her. And she's also taken several body measurements to include her neck, her arms, her waist, her legs. And then when she starts working out, she keeps a detailed log of every workout she does, how fast and how long she runs for, how much weight she lifts, how many reps, how many sets. And she's also going to record, how well she's sleeping each night and what food she's eating. And see, after a month, much like John, she doesn't see a lot of distinct changes in the mirror. She feels a little better, but it's where the data comes through that shows the progress that she's making. See, she can definitively look and see that her weight has gone up a little bit. Her legs and her arms have gotten a little bit bigger, but her waist size has gotten just a little bit smaller. And she's able to maintain a running pace that's 2 miles an hour faster than when she first started. And she's also seen a 2% increase on the 1 rep maxes for all 4 exercises that she previously identified. See, each time she tests for a 1 rep max, she can put on just a little bit more weight or run for just a little bit longer. It brings a huge smile to her face because she's able to document it. She's able to see it. And that gives her the dopamine hit that she needs to continue staying invested in this difficult process. And even though she's making small progress, it's measurable because she set the conditions for her success by doing this pretest. And each time she sets a new record, she gets that boost of re-encouragement that what she's doing is working. And so after 3 months, she's been hitting new personal records almost weekly, and all the progress just boosts her self-esteem and makes her feel better, which causes a feedback loop of her staying invested in what she's doing. And she keeps up the hard work and continues to improve, getting better and better every day. So we can see with these examples how important it is to take a pre-test with everything that we do so that we have something to look back on and measure to compare our current conditions to our previous conditions before we tried to conduct our actions. And so Sarah was able to definitively every single day show, I was here, now I'm here. She could show that progress. Whereas John, because he didn't have this, he's just like, I'm here. Well, what does this mean? It's not in relation to anything. Never mind. Yeah. And so he couldn't rely on any measure. All he could rely upon were measures of performance in the gym. He's like, well, I'm hitting the gym 3 to 4 times a week, but he didn't have any measures of effectiveness. And because he couldn't see the progress, he showed no relation to his measures of performance. He couldn't show that he was moving towards his desired end state. And he eventually lost the motivation and gave up. See, when we use this strategy, we can take these ideas even further by demonstrably proving how effective we are for evaluations. So what sounds better to a hiring manager or to a promotion board? I worked really hard at my job. I increased sales over the last quarter. Or I spent 7 hours each week dedicated to marketing. And over a 3-month period, I discovered that online marketing was more effective than billboards because of the pre and post tests I did. And because of this, I was able to implement changes that increased sales in my assigned district by 17%. See, our first example, it's mushy. It's subjective. I increased sales. I worked really hard. Well, hard is not a unit of measurement that I'm aware of. Don't go there. Like it's not specific, observable, or measurable, right? And anyone can like refute the results. But the second person, they had specific observable and measurable units. They were like, sales were this on this date. I chose this action and I increased sales by 17%. Nobody can refute that. They have a definitive measure of effectiveness for the efforts that they were doing. And so by taking pre-tests, even if the results are small, we will still find them. We still know that what we're doing is working towards our desired end state, even if it's not immediate. And as long as we only change one aspect at a time, we can start to tweak our process and find out which strategies or techniques work better. Maybe we do this exercise for a month and we see, okay, it improves by this much. And then we try a different exercise and then it improves by this much. And we're like, oh my gosh, okay, I definitely know exercise B is working better than exercise A. But if we're not using this strategy, there's no way for us to definitively identify those differences. And so in conclusion, kind of bringing it all together, we see failure all over the place, like changing the world, doing diets, starting businesses, building nations. Like these things are freaking hard. And achieving our desired end state is often far more complex than what we initially thought. But with a little bit of planning, a little bit of practice, we can weaponize our success by employing a strategic framework towards solving our problems. And we do this by operationalizing our end state into specific, observable, and measurable goals. We then identify specific indicators of success. And then we take those indicators of success and we conduct pre and post testing to ensure that the efforts we're doing, the measures of performance, are actually contributing to demonstrable measures of effectiveness. And bam, just like that, you have been effectively inoculated to failure. So that was a lot. That was a bit of a marathon run. What did you guys think? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Were the examples too much? What is an example of how you've used a strategy like this in the past that has helped you? Or do you have a different technique that you use to try and show how your actions are demonstrably impacting your desired end state? If you've made it this far in the video, please consider hitting that like and that subscribe button. It really helps us out. It shows us what content you guys are liking and it helps us refine our metrics because, again, those are our indicators of success, right? If episode A has really high likes and subscribes, episode B doesn't, there we go. We got our measures of success, and now we can kind of tweak the show to reflect what you guys, what's resonating with you guys. In terms of our closing thoughts and quote for the day, this is going to come from Charles Babbage, and he said, "Errors using inadequate data are much less than those using no data at all." All right, that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. I deeply appreciate you guys spending your time with me, and we look forward to seeing you guys next week. Tell us what you guys are doing, what projects you're working on, and be a part of Renegade Institute history. Outside of that, have a wonderful day. Cheers. or blah, 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 blah. I worked really hard at my job. I increased sales over the last quarter. Or I spent blah, 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 blah. And like, in order for us to achieve our desired end state, blah, 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 blah. Rewind that. We're going to start over. So